I am the Executive Director of the Ohio Mideastern Governments Association. And following the pandemic, we received some funding from the U.S. Economic Development Administration to help our region recover from the pandemic. And one of the things I think that everybody is aware of is that the pandemic really exacerbated the need for widespread, reliable, high-speed broadband throughout the region. And so with the money from EDA, we are doing a region-wide broadband feasibility study. We're almost completed with the study, and so the intent of today's meeting is to kind of present some of the detailed results from Coshocton County, get your input on unserved and underserved areas. We will be live streaming this meeting, and it will be posted to Facebook and YouTube following the meeting. So we really would your comments from the public, so that we can put our final touches on this plan. Unfortunately, due to some technical difficulties, Sean O'Malley with the Reid Consulting Group, who is the firm that we retained to do the broadband feasibility study, was unable to attend in person today. So he is going to be presenting live or via Zoom, and he'll be available for any questions that you may have. We do ask, again, since this is being recorded, if during the course of the presentation you have a question, maybe if you could come up closer to our friend the owl here, just to make sure that we're able to capture your question. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sean, and we want to keep this relatively informal. So as we progress with the presentation, if you have some questions, feel free to let us know. Also, I wanted to mention, and Sean will probably do as well in his presentation, for those of you that have been at some of our other board meetings, some of the material may be a little familiar to you, but for those who haven't been able to attend our board meetings, we wanted to make sure that everyone has the full picture of the state of broadband in our region. Also wanted to point out that I think Sean will also mention the huge investment that the Coshocton County Commissioners are making in broadband in Coshocton County. And one of the handouts in the back shows the proposed coverage area for that investment that the county is making. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Sean O'Malley.
Thank you, Jeanette. Apologies for not being able to be there in person. Just kind of drives home the dependence that we have on technology, where I think can have pretty far-reaching consequences. Share the screen here.
Can everyone hear okay?
Yeah, is my audio good? Is that projecting far?
I'm going to attempt to
maybe just a little bit.
turn it up. Hold on just a second here.
All right, I will keep talking so that you have a sense for how loud I will be.
And there's a plus button on the side, or on the bottom of the side, or one of the sides. There you go.
Sometimes it's simpler than you think.
That's the best way.
Okay.
It's so nice when something turns out simple in technology.
Is that good for you guys?
Yeah. So this is working. You should be seeing my title slide. Are we good, Kennedy?
We're great.
Great. All right. So this, as Jeanette said, this would not be possible without the funding both that Omega has contributed. We also worked with neighboring development districts, Buckeye Hills, OPRDC, and Eastgate, and quite a few other partners around the state that helped make this possible. Without the funding from these folks, this would not happen. This is important work. We really appreciate this being available. We really need to position our region for the win. I apologize for the Bengals, perhaps, given you all's proximity to Pittsburgh and Cleveland. But Joey Burrow is a hometown boy. Grew up in Athens, went to high school with my kids. So I like to use him as a good example of a local boy being good. But to make this happen, number one, you need to identify where the problem is. You need to prioritize which areas you want to focus on. You get funding to be able to impacts the rest of those areas. And then finally, you need to track where that funding is being spent and enforce it being spent right. I'm going to start out at the state level. And again, some of you have seen some of this content before. Please bear with me through that. I want to make sure that anybody who is coming into this for the first time has good context. So I'll start at the state level, and then I will zoom down into the region Coshocton County. So at a statewide, it's a pretty bleak looking picture. Anything that's orange or dark red here is unserved according to the FCC, and even the yellow and the light greens are underserved by the new federal infrastructure standards. Only the dark green is considered well served, and if you look at that, it's just the little dots over here in like little bits of Cleveland, little bits of Columbus, some slightly bigger bits of Cincinnati, little ones in Dayton, these tiny ones over in the Youngstown area, I think. So it's a pretty significant issue all across the state. And this is based on over 9 million consumer speed tests. So this was folks who just went out and made the tests themselves because they were curious how fast their internet was. We do want to have folks continue to take these speed tests. There are instructions on how to do it by connectingappalachia.org if you'd like to take a speed test yourself. Any tests you make on that will get added to the data, and then it will show up in reports down the road to be able to see how things are changing. So as far as what this means, these are the numbers you want to look at here, the unserved. So it's about 2/3 of the populated square miles are unserved, and just about 800,000 households. It's quite a bit. The FCC thinks it's only 200,000. They've admitted that that's a low estimate. They've come out and admitted that their maps are not that good. Microsoft thinks it's as many as 2 million households. So it's a big problem no matter who you look at. As far as why this happens, it really comes down to population density. When you look at a city like Columbus, you've got about 1,500 households per square mile in there. Even when you get down into a smaller city like Connellsville, you're still looking at almost 500 households per square mile. And that's enough population to make it worth an internet provider's while to run the cabling that they need to run to have good service in that area. It's when you get down into what we call the rural expanse, which is oftentimes below 2 or even 1% of the density you'd see in a city. That's where you have to get some subsidy in there. No for-profit provider is going to build a network there. Even a municipal network would have trouble making ends meet at this level of density without some subsidy. This isn't a new issue. It's been a century now nearly that the federal government has been aware of the fact that telecommunications in the rural expanse need to be subsidized. All the way back in 1934, all people in the United States shall have access to rapid, efficient, nationwide communication service with adequate facilities and reasonable charges. Great language. They were talking about landline phones back then, but that applies just equally to broadband these days. Since 1990, which basically when the web was invented, $100 billion has been spent from the FCC to the big telecommunications companies, but we haven't seen any real results. I like to liken that to road maintenance. If you stop maintaining your roads for a few decades, you're going to get some pretty darn big potholes. If you keep leaving them with no maintenance, you're eventually going to wind up with a Jeep tractor, a goat path. And unfortunately, that's where we have wound up. Most of our region is served on copper cables. They were installed about a half century ago to do phone lines. It was great technology at the time. It's got a good long lifespan. 3 decades is pretty typical. But so now we're 20 years beyond that lifespan, and this stuff is falling apart. And the companies who own it, who were paid to put that in half a century ago, they're not maintaining it anymore because they don't have landline customers. New ones are not signing up. Many of the folks who used to have landlines are dropping them in favor of cell phones. So it's just sitting there turning into a goat path and figuratively. To stick with the road analogy here, when you build a new road, it's important that you have specifications. You can't just, if you get funding to put in a highway, you can't just go out and say, oh yeah, we're going to throw down some base material and dump some asphalt over the top of it and call it good. There are 1,000-page long documents that specify how you build a highway, all the way from your subgrade up to your surface course. Like, you have to meet those specifications in order to receive the funding and to have the highway be built properly. That's not the case with broadband right now. They don't have detailed specifications. Usually what they'll just say is, oh, provide a specific speed and you're good. It doesn't matter whether the technology that's providing that speed is gonna last 2 years or 40 years. And that can be a problem. To give you a sense of this for long term, back in 1990s when the web was basically invented, and ever since then, we have seen a tenfold increase in bandwidth demand. So back in 1990, it was 100 kilobits, 1/10 of a megabit basically. By 2000, it was up to a megabit. 2010, back when Zoom first came on the scene as a company, it was up to 10 megabits for a well-served area. The 25 megabit standard that the FCC uses to say whether you have broadband or not, that was a well-served area in 2012. So already that standard is old. Today you're looking at 100 megabits. If you're in a city, that's what you're gonna see as a minimum, typically for your service. Where are we headed from there? We can look in the crystal ball if we like. I won't say what specific technology is gonna be around 30 years from now, but I'm pretty sure that this trend is gonna continue. It's really easy to see this. Already there are providers that offer gigabit service. DSL, fixed wireless and satellite, right now top out at about 100 megabits. So they work today, but they're not gonna hold up much longer as the demand continues to increase. Cable modems right now, pretty common to be able to provide a gigabit download. They have more trouble on the upload. I have noticed that Spectrumists and some of the smaller local cable operations are starting to offer 2 gigabit download. So they're gonna be good for about a decade, especially if you're just consuming stuff rather than sending out content. Fiber's the only one that can make it all the way out to 100 gigabits. There actually are fiber networks right now that run at that speed. Are we actually gonna be at that amount, 100,000 megabits 3 decades from now? Maybe not, but I really believe that it will at least reach 10 gigabits. And that's, right now, the only technology that can do that is fiber, especially if you needed to be able to go in both directions. The biggest challenge that cable companies have is that their infrastructure was not built to upload things, it was built for consumption. So, but they can handle fast download speeds. Where they run into trouble is when you get a lot of people trying to do Zoom calls at the same time, and they need to be able to upload just as much video as they're downloading. That's where the problem comes. So as far as planning this stuff, this is infrastructure. Like the water system, you don't want to have to go back and dig up the ground again 5 years later because you didn't make the pipes big enough. We recommend looking at the window from about 2025 up to 2055. The reason that I say don't start until a couple of years out like that is that it takes a while to gear these things up. These are big construction projects. As I'll talk later about the state of Ohio's broadband expansion program, they're a pretty aggressive program and they're still having like a 2-year window on commitments. Part of that is because of the supply chain issues. It's just challenging to get stuff manufactured, all of those electronics, and like even the fiber cable. So there's supply and demand too. Now that a lot of money is becoming available from the federal government and the states for broadband projects, lots of providers are putting in orders for fiber optic cable. So in the next few years, it's a really good idea to look at things that can be deployed quickly. Coshocton did a great move by partnering to get the wireless stuff up, get a bunch of new towers put up, get more transmitters put on existing towers and vertical structures. That's a great move because it gets people served right away, and it also provides some competitive pressure on the big incumbent internet providers so that when they start to roll out their own stuff, there's an option for people if it turns out that because like Charter ends up being the only wired provider in a certain area, if their service isn't as good as they said it was, there's that option to say, well, we've got another provider, we can just switch. That's really smart. It's a good use of our funds. So when I talk about building fiber, not all fiber is made the same. The cables, yeah, it's all a glass strand inside of some sort of armor, but the costs can be different than how you do it. So one of the first things you have to think about when you do fiber is it has to be attached to utility poles usually. Some parts of our region you can go underground. I know there's a project with a private company in Belmont, Belmont County, where they're trying to put a lot of their fiber underground. Depending on the geology, you might be able to pull that off. Sometimes though you'll run into surface rock. So when we built our budget projections, and I'll show you later, we assumed that you'd be putting them up on the utility poles. And the range, we're figuring between a low of 32,000 and a high of 60,000. We settled in the middle on 41,000 because when we did this analysis, that was about what it would cost if you were able to get approval from your county to just go in and put in a new set of poles just for communications. So if it costs more than that, it's actually better to just go independent rather than try to go with utility companies. Then you've got the fiber cost itself. Low again, about 32,000 a mile, high of 40,000 a mile. We're erring on the high side right now, partly because of inflation. That could push these prices up even more. When you add them up together, you're looking at about 81,000 a mile to do this. We are aware of project in a neighboring development district in OBRDC where these numbers did sort of bear out. They were within these ranges for what they ended up paying to do the fiber. The design we're talking about here is what they call high strand count. So fiber optic cable is a bundle of little glass fibers, each of which transmits a whole bunch of data. And you can get them in different sizes. You can get things that are called drop cables that just have a handful of fibers in them that are designed usually to go from a utility pole or one of those boxes on the ground to an individual house or to a small neighborhood that's got like 10 houses in it. It's possible to build a fiber network with nothing but drop cable. And in our region, in the low population density areas, you can get away with that right now. The problem with it's really cheap. The problem with doing that is it'll work fine for now, but if you start getting any increase in your population, you'll run into capacity issues where if like the population doubles, you won't have enough capacity on those drop lines that are serving as your backbone. So we're recommending building high strand count, put enough fibers in there so you can not only serve every household right now, but you've got spares available if cell companies come in and want to expand their cell service, put in new towers or do 5G. That stuff needs a lot of fiber. It also has, we're building in about another 50% extra that is just what is dark right now. It's not being used, but it would be there so that when the population increases, you'd be able to actually still have capacity. We also assume that you use good cable, armored stuff, high quality fiber strands. USDA has specific criteria that they use for these cables. This also makes it more reliable. For some reason, squirrels love to chew on fiber optic cable. They like it even better than power cables, maybe because they don't die when they chew on the fiber cables. But the stuff we're specifying has like multiple layers of armor in it, so that even if the squirrel chews through the outside, which is, I guess they like the taste of insulation, there's another set of armor inside there that the squirrel tip will go stop at, and it'll keep the water out so the cable doesn't go bad from that one chew. And as I said above, we're assuming that you're putting on the existing utility poles after you deal with the make-ready. Going underground, we figure it adds about $10,000 to $50,000 per mile. And it's hard to predict that because, again, the geology varies. Some places you might have 3 feet of space before you hit any serious rock. Other places, you're 2 inches down and you're on rock. So to give you a sense of why make-ready can be expensive, sometimes it's a matter of the clearance, sometimes it's a matter of how old the poles are. So in this picture here, we've got your primary electric lines are these ones on top, your secondary lines are on the bottom, classic transformer here, you got the wire that goes in to feed the house their power. If you're gonna work in this space, you basically need to be working for a utility company. There are all kinds of safety precautions and certifications you need to get up in that space. You don't want a communications company getting anywhere near that because you're gonna end up with technicians getting killed. And it's not legal even. So communication lines get placed down here at this 3rd tier. And there is a minimum clearance that you can have before you reach the ground. And these things sag a bit, especially during the summer when things warm up and everything expands and they'll drop lower. In the winter you get ice loads on them. So minimum clearance in our area, when you add another line underneath there, our beautiful hills can become a problem because a lot of these spans are crossing terrain changes that are up and down, and you'll end up no longer meeting the minimum clearance requirements, in which case the utility company has to go in and put in a taller pole so that everything can be moved up higher. Other cases, it might be enough clearance, but the pole is old enough. But again, when you add another line, fiber optic isn't that heavy,
except in the winter. You get an ice storm, you get a lot of weight on that line from the ice that forms on it. That can turn out to be too much force on the pole if it's old, and it'll snap. So in that case, again, they end up having to replace a pole. So that's what you're looking at in terms of why it gets so expensive to do what they call make-ready. We're gonna start at the state level, zooming in here now on the Omega district. You can see it's a pretty startling amount of coverage here that is not good. The red again is below 10 megabits, orange is below 25 megabits. Both of those colors are considered unserved right now. And then you've got, we went ahead and coded into yellow to show, to show the stuff that is also considered underserved. So if you're looking at Coshocton, you've got a lot of outlying area in the rural expanse that is unserved. So over 3/4 of populated acres in the district, 1/3 of the households are not served. This overlay here shows fiber optic. This is what we call middle mile. They call it middle mile because it basically sits in the middle between the internet at large, like the high capacity pipelines that run from city to city across the country, and local internet providers' offices. Basically, you would run small drop cables off of all these lines to reach, or like that, you would build another backbone into these areas in order to reach the spaces you need. So you need, that's called last mile. You need this middle mile to be able to make broadband happen, but it's only one part of the puzzle. All of this blue is existing open middle mile, so that's available to be leased by any company that's interested in it. These pink runs are things that we suggest if folks are able to secure funding to do middle mile, because sometimes there are projects that focus on that. These would complete the rings essentially. Coshocton missed out on this open middle mile that was built about 10 years ago. So you all could really use a good middle mile project if you wanted to get additional providers in. So here I went ahead and changed the color coding so it's easier to see just the stuff that's below 25.3. So all of this is the area that is in most need. There was some federal money that was awarded back in 2020 at the end of the year called Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF. As it said, is an acronym. Federal folks love their acronyms. So Charter, which is their internet brand is Spectrum, you might know them as Spectrum. They won a lot of territory in Coshocton. And initially, we were concerned that they weren't going to build this, but they've since put the money where their mouth is. They've been doing work in Guernsey already. I think there might even be some prep happening in Coshocton. You all can confirm this better than me at this point. But it looks like they're going to build that, so you've got a decent chunk of your unserved area that is going to end up being covered by Charter. And originally, one of our concerns with this program is that the timeline is 10 years, so that they weren't required to be done until a decade from now. But because of the Ohio Residential Broadband Grant Program, Charter ended up committing to do this in 2 years because there were other internet providers who applied for state funding to serve these areas that Charter won in RDOF, and so they challenged that as part of the Ohio program and said, no, we're going to serve that. Well, when they filed that challenge, if they win a challenge, they are then committing to serving that area within 2 years. So Charter ended up having to commit to all their RDOF areas to say, yeah, we'll do it in 2 years. So that was a good result of that. There was a lot of territory for South Central Power. They won a huge grant to do Harrison and Belmont County, and then a little fragment of Jefferson and a little bit of Carroll. It doesn't help Coshocton, but there will be additional rounds of funding from Ohio on this, so there will be opportunities for providers to apply in these other unserved areas in Coshocton as well. This is what the first round looked like. So Charter Spectrum did win some territory in Coshocton. I don't have it mapped on there yet because Broadband Ohio has not finalized the address list yet on that. I was able to map the South Central Power stuff because we were representing them in the bidding for that grant. So when they won that grant, we had detailed mapping already for that. But as soon as Broadband Ohio releases the information on these other providers, we will go ahead and add that to the map because it'll be way easier to plan. Because of course, you're not going to want to apply for funding in a place that already got funding from the state, especially from the state. because Broadband Ohio has done a really good job of running their program. They have been really fast to get it up and running. They've been really responsive every step of this way. They've been pushing the providers to meet the deadlines, and we believe they're going to hold them accountable. So it's a good program. At this point, I want to switch over to the county profile for Coshocton. Take a second while I switch my screen share. You can find this profile out on connectingappalachia.org and on the Omega District site, omegadistrict.org. Both of those have profiles for the region posted there. So, share.
And while Sean is connecting to those profiles, there's also, if you haven't picked up a handout, a paper copy of the profile as well, if you're interested. And Sean, just so you're aware, Ashley Carlin has also joined us today representing Charter. So.
Excellent, all right. Actually, we appreciate Charter's efforts with RDOF to serve all the territory you want. That's great. Okay, so here's the profile showing Coshocton County. Brings in that kind of focused in, zoomed in on the more local issues. So you're looking at about half of your households do not have access to the FCC minimum. When you look at populated area, it's 91%. So there's a lot of territory that needs to be served. And again, the color coding on here lets you be able to figure out just how bad off they are. The dark red is the worst, the orange is still unserved, and then when you get into yellow, you're looking at underserved. We did not, for this one, we did not distinguish between 5010 and 120 because there were such tiny pockets of 120 that it just was visually easier to look at it this way. We will be publishing a web map of this for Omega that they'll be able to share login with county commissioners and planning folks. You'll be able to zoom in and see this in more detail so that you can identify areas that you want to cover. So looking at business, the effects on business here. So the color coding on this map, the salmon color is all of the space that is unserved. So below 10.1, below 25.3, we just did a single color so it would be easier to see that because it would get really busy with all this other detail. Then the blue dots on here are business locations. And we adjusted the size of those based on how we figured the broadband demand was going to be. So the bigger the dot, the more demand you have. The way we did this, we took Dun & Bradstreet data, which identifies all the businesses in a county, and then says how many employees they have and what industry sector they're in. The more employees a business has, the more demand we expect there to be. And then depending on the sector, we expect the demand to change. So for example, an IT operation, a bank, a healthcare clinic, an educational institution, they're gonna have a lot of broadband demand, whereas something like a waste management service or a excavation contractor, they're still gonna need broadband in their office, but if they have the same number of employees as a healthcare clinic, like both have 50 employees, the healthcare clinic, probably almost all of those employees are on site using tablets constantly to update patient charts, things like that. Whereas in the construction operation, I'm betting there's 2 or 3 people in the office and the other 47 are out in the field, you know, running backhoes or putting up walls and things on construction sites. So they'll need less broadband. So that's how we adjusted things. I'll show you later in this profile, I'll give you a look at the business sectors and how we split them up. So you can see that there are big concentrations of businesses in the areas that are already served. But when you go up here in like the northeast quadrant, you've got quite a few businesses, some of which have significant predicted demand that are in areas that are not served right now. Same thing over here in the southwestern area. So this can be useful, again, when that web map is available for you, it'll probably be easier. You can zoom in on these areas. You'll be able to click on the dot to identify what that business was that's on Bradstreet. Sometimes you may find a business that's mapped on here that might no longer exist. That's just a flaw with Dun & Bradstreet. Every company that tracks businesses has that issue. Dun & Bradstreet seems to be the best though in terms of their data being current. So looking at residential population density, that's what this map does. Again, the salmon is unserved, the white is served. We just wanted to make it simple to look at with one color. All of these points represent households. Now, this is not all 17,000 households, and or not all 9,000 that are unserved. There's no way you can display that many points at this resolution. But we were able to figure out a way that kind of is a compromise between a heat map and just showing the points. Because the heat map, I think, is less meaningful because it's so just sort of things are smeared around, you can't see as well. Whereas here, you can actually spot the patterns, where like you've got little concentrations of houses versus ones that are just along the road. And again, this can be useful. So I remember there was business demand in this northeastern and in the southwestern quadrants. There are also, you could overlay this in the web map and say, well, we've got a lot of households and business demand in this particular chunk, or maybe in here. Those might be areas that you would want to prioritize to get service to sooner or to apply for specific development grants for. This cleaner version right here looks at the roads that are unserved. So all of them, again, salmon is the unserved territory, white is served, so you can just ignore that. Any of these little line segments that are in the salmon spaces, including in like these little fragments in here, maybe I should zoom in on that so it's easier to see. So like in this spot here, where you have this little dash, there were some little bits of census blocks that were showing as served there, so we did not count those. Down here, when you get in these spaces, again, you can see it's only the roads that fall in the touch census blocks that were unserved that we counted. The reason for doing this analysis with roads like this is essentially you need to follow the roads when you're serving homes and businesses. So this is a good way to figure out how much fiber you're gonna have to install in order to serve everyone. So to reach all of the homes and businesses in all of this unserved territory, you're looking at almost 900 miles of fiber to be installed. So that can become a fairly significant expense. Might as well go right to the expense here. So remember, all of these budget numbers are based on that high-end fiber network that I was talking about earlier. High strand count, backbone, enough capacity to serve growth over the next 3 to 4 decades. So you're looking at total cost for the county to reach all of those unserved areas at just under 80 million. It's about 9,000 households. The average density is about 10 households per fiber mile. And remember, that's significantly lower than many internet providers are willing to do without subsidy. We calculate that a provider would probably, given this density, be willing to kick in just over 1,700 per household. So a provider would be investing about 15.8 million if they were doing the whole county. That still leaves 63 million to deal with to get that 900 miles of fiber installed. So just under 7,000 per household of subsidy needed. So to come back to the coverage, lots of charter coverage in Coshocton County. So a good chunk of that 63 million will be accounted for already because of the fact that charter, it looks like they're going to build in all these areas. This paler blue is a company called Mercury Wireless. We hear that some of their RDOF funding is now reaching the point where it's about to be authorized, which means they'll actually get the money to do the work. We still don't understand how Mercury Wireless is going to pull this off because their awards across the state look a lot like you put up a piece of paper and shot it with a shotgun. They're just little dots all around the state. And to do a fiber network in those places, and they did bid to do fiber to the home, you got to connect all those together somehow. So they're going to end up having to build hundreds of miles of fiber that are passing through areas where they're not getting any subsidy to try to serve anyone there. They'll be passing through areas that are already served, and they'll be competing with another provider who's already got the infrastructure there. So for grant application purposes, we're telling folks in counties to still at this point, until there's evidence that Mercury Wireless is actually going to build, that they should go ahead and they can apply for grants on top of this, like at the state level. And the state agrees, the state is allowing people to apply to overbuild on these RDOF areas that were not authorized. As I said, Charter successfully challenged all these areas, so they have committed to building there. Once we get the state numbers out for the coverage, we will adjust the budget numbers on here. We'll provide an update that says how much gap is still left. So instead of 63 million, it'll be a smaller figure. I'm not going to read this methodology to you. It's pretty dry, but we do include detailed information on how we built these ratings. We didn't just like grab speed test data and just go with that. We combined in a bunch of other information, including carrier reports to the FCC. That's called Form 477. If you're familiar with that. Also, there are reports through USAC that identify actual deployments. We took those into account. We also looked at things like population density and whether RDOF had been authorized for that or not. I talked about the Business Broadband Opportunity Index. Here are the industry categories. So you can see healthcare, education, TCOM, IT, banking. Those are the big consumers. When you get down into the lower areas, you're looking at things like manufacturing, printing, restaurants, farming. I would note that farming, some people say, well, that's really not a broadband demand. A lot of operations now, their tractors talk to the cloud. If you got a dairy farm, all of the milking machinery and the monitoring stuff that they use to make sure the cows are happy is all digitally driven now. That stuff is managed remotely. And if you've gotten bad connectivity in your farm, your equipment isn't going to work right. One of my wife's family, I'm not sure what in-law name it would be for her great aunt, but they run a dairy farm out in PA, and they made it clear, they're like, your cows have to be happy. If you don't have happy cows, you don't have product. So got to make sure to keep those operations running. And for better or worse, broadband now is part of the equation as to whether that livestock is happy or not. Have detailed information on how we estimated our costs here. If you want to look through on that. I kind of gave you the summary on that earlier. We give more detail on how the make-ready goes and what you run into if you're trying to go underground. Simpler version of that demand map. We found that this is a really useful graphic to show people, like if you're trying to make a case with a planning agency that is questioning you on why you want to build a really high quality network in an area that, in their opinion, is maybe doesn't quote deserve it. That always frustrates me when someone will say something like that about our region. But this is a good way to make that clear to folks about why you need to build high quality networks now. And finally, a breakdown of how the budget was calculated. So next steps on this, I would suggest prioritization and identifying areas you want to focus on are the most important. We will get those web maps out in the next couple of weeks, so those will be in hand. Jeanette will be able to share the login information for you to be able to look at that. I would suggest turning layers, and we'll have a guide to show how it works. So we'll have all of these layers in there where you'll be able to turn them on and off, change how transparent they are. So like, you know, the printed profile, if you're looking at that, like you have to flip pages back and forth to say, well, I want to compare business with residential with where the existing fiber is, and it's in 3 different pages. Well, in the web map, you'll be able to put those all on top of each other and then fade them in and out so that you can get a vision of what you want to see. You can zoom in and turn on like the 911 addresses to figure out, okay, here's where all the households are. Go in, do that. If you need to take a screenshot printer or something and draw a circle, like draw the areas and say, these are like the 4 places that we want to prioritize applying for new grants and new funding. And then once you've done that, then you can start figuring out, okay, which is going to be best. Is this going to be an ARP grant? Is this some place where we want to maybe use some of the ARPA funding to work with a wireless provider? Or is this going to be something that we want to talk an internet provider into applying to the Ohio Residential Broadband Program? At this point, I will happy to take any questions anyone has.
So anyone from the audience have any questions or comments?
Can you give a little more details on how you get the location of the speed test? Is there a form to fill out when doing those speed tests?
Yeah, location. Yeah, that came through well. So your audio is good in the room today. That's great. Yeah, so the way the location data works is that, Ookla is the company we're using, or the state used them. Again, I need to give kudos to Broadband Ohio. They were really forward thinking when they licensed a year and a half's worth of speed test data for the whole state. But essentially, Ookla is a company that runs speedtest.net, and if you look up speed test on your phone for an app, speed test by Ookla is gonna be the one that shows up as the first result. They're the 800-pound gorilla in speed tests. So if you're on a phone or a tablet, or if you're running the app on a laptop that has a GPS chip in it, when you run a speed test, it actually pings your GPS location and includes your coordinates with your speed test results. So in theory, like that could be accurate to within 3 feet. Now when Ookla provides the reports to folks like the state of Ohio when they purchase a subscription to their speed test intelligence service, they smear it out a little bit. They take any test they have basically a grid through whatever area, like the whole state, and it's 100 meters on a radius. So you've got circles that are about a football field in radius, so 2 football fields wide if you're just looking at the size of it. Any test result that is located within that radius will be located in that point for that location. And they do that so that folks don't feel like their privacy's been invaded. Like, a lot of people would not want someone to be able to go look at the Ookla data and say, oh, Sean ran a speed test at his house last week, and that's the speed he got. So they essentially aggregate that into 100-meter radius spaces for each location. And so some of those locations might only have, really thinly populated area, they only might have, 3 or 4 households in them. But when you get into the more dense areas, there can be hundreds or sometimes even thousands of test results in a location based on how many people fall within that radius. We recommend, like the instructions that we have out on connectingappalachia.org, for folks to take the speed test, we recommend that they use their phone connected to Wi-Fi and then run the app, because that guarantees that there'll be GPS data with it. If you just go to speedtest.net on a web browser, like on your computer at your house, unless there's a GPS chip in your computer, it has to depend on the same kind of location service that companies like Home Depot or Lowe's use. When you go to their site and you shop online and they guess at your location, they say, hey, your local store is, and then they give you a guess. That's done by a third-party company. Ookla uses them, like all these retail companies use them as well. When they do that location work, sometimes it's really precise, depending on the network you're on. Other times, it's completely wrong. I'm a good example of this. When I run a speed test on my phone, it pinpoints me to my house. When I run a speed test on my computer, it thinks I'm in Altoona, Pennsylvania. I live in Athens, Ohio. I figured out why that is. The only broadband I can get here, and the FCC would not call it broadband, is an LTE connection. So I basically have a cellular SIM card in a little router that talks to a cell tower, and Verizon's network, where it joins back up with the rest of the internet, is a backbone connection out in Altoona. And so that location service, that's all it can tell us, that I'm appearing for the first time on the internet with my test in Altoona. So it puts me there. Lots of detail on that. I hope that answered your question. If not, please let me know.
Yes, it did.
Mentioned is the funding gap, the $63.6 million. Where would that come from, or what are possibilities would come from? Are we talking grant money with that?
Yeah, ideally that would be grant money. I'm pretty sure there are not many municipalities or counties who would have room in their budget to be able to be just helping with that kind of a cost out of their own coffers, out of their own tax bases. The sources that are out there on the horizon right now include the RDOF program. There will be another round of RDOF. We're hearing kind of scuttlebutt that maybe the FCC is going to just kind of pull back all future versions of RDOF and like do a new program that is put together a little better. But there will be more money coming out of there. USDA has got a couple of programs through them. The Treasury Department, for some reason, got into the broadband business as well. They had like $270 million through the Capital Projects Fund. ARC, Appalachian Regional Commission, has subsidized programs that can be used for broadband. Their power program, you can apply there. I think that's up to
2.5 million?
2.5, I was gonna say 2 million, thank you, 2.5 million. There's also, the Our Distressed County program also is one that can be an option. The really big one though right now is going to be the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There is probably about $1.5 billion coming down for Ohio, through that. And we are almost 100% certain that that money, when it gets authorized, is gonna go through Broadband Ohio, which is the agency that I was telling you is so great. So there's gonna be, this is like, I'm not like, I don't feel like I'm exaggerating when I say this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for our region. Like broadband is finally on the big government players' radar, and they're treating it like a big infrastructure investment project. So this is our chance. This is our chance to get, like, when you look at a $63 million cost for subsidizing Coshocton County, you're like, we can't do that. Well, we can right now. That money is going to be there. Tom and I have been beating our heads against this broadband problem in the region for way longer than either of us cares to admit. I feel optimistic for once. I honestly am optimistic about the future at this point with all of these programs being available and the way folks who are managing that money are looking at it.
Sean, I'm not sure if this would be a question for you or someone else in the room, but the project, what charter's been assigned, what charter's looking to do, and what Coshocton County's doing right now with Ohio TT and its wireless project. How does that fit together or complement each other?
I can give you kind of a general answer on that, and maybe I don't want to put our charter person on the spot if they want to speak up or not from their perspective. But those all, I think, fit together well. I'm a big fan of competition, so I'm happy to see that you've got both a wireless program and a big wireline provider who are both going to be doing service into new areas, because it just results, from a consumer standpoint, it results in typically better performance and lower prices. In terms of planning, that's where we have the coverage maps for the wireless project. We have a screenshot of that we could use. They may be able to provide us if they give us a layer too, we might be able to include that in. But essentially what you would do is you would take the coverage from the wireless provider, you would look at the space that is the charter's gonna cover with RDOF, overlay them all, and then put underneath that the unserved territory and say, okay, here's what's left. Now maybe let's flip on the addresses and see where's the greatest need, flip on the business layers, figure out where the businesses are located. So essentially it's all ideally you want to take a holistic look at the whole county and say, where is there already subsidy been given? Where is there no subsidy? Where is the need?
And I think, again, my hat's off to the commissioners for having the foresight to use their ARPA funds to extend wireless through the county. And as Sean mentioned, one of the handouts was that screenshot. And I'm not going to speak for Ashley, but I live in Guernsey County, and I can tell you that they are actively extending broadband throughout Guernsey County, including along the road that I live. So, I think again, this is a great opportunity for us.
Dane Schreier, one of the county commissioners here. I just wanted to touch base. We talked about a lot there, and I think affordability, competition drives affordability. A lot of our residents are lower income in particular areas. So that becomes whether it's available or not, and whether it's affordable to that group or not. And my standpoint is, you have to have it. But when it comes down to dollars, there will be people that will not be able to pay what some of the rates are going to be in the future. But where's Starlink, for lack of better terms, fit into this picture? Because we have several residents that are already hooked up I mean, we're seeing hands.
Receiving good service in really, really underserved places. I know of one individual out in the Woodbury area that has no cell phone service that's receiving great service from Starlink.
I guess there may be two questions there, affordability and where does this other competition from Starlink come in play here? And does that affect the availability of this RDOF dollars or the the build out of that? So it might be multiple questions there.
On Starlink, they're a really interesting company. Kennedy can actually speak to the experience of it, since they got their kit recently and got it up and running. In terms of, actually go ahead, Kenny, why don't you tell them what it was like?
Much like the individual that Mr. Drew was speaking of, my husband and I live sort of about 10 minutes outside of town. It doesn't take me long to get into downtown Coshocton, but we have no cell phone signal, and no broadband provider would come out to us. So we had satellite internet for a little while, and my husband is accustomed to fast broadband speeds. I'm not, so it was a very high priority for him to get Starlink. He did, and I can Zoom, I can watch Netflix, I can download anything I need to download, and honestly, I haven't really found too much of a variation in service quality in terms of weather impact as well. We still get really good service, whether it's rainy, windy, snowing, whatever, so.
To talk in terms of like Starlink is great for the folks who get it. I was on their beta list for, I think it's going on 2 years now, still no word from them whether they're gonna actually deliver something to me. And in my setting, like I have climbed up on my roof a couple of times. One time I almost fell off because I was staring at my phone, showing at the sky, because they have an app that you can use to scan the sky to see what your coverage is gonna be like. And even though I can almost see all of the sky, there was one big tree that I would have to cut down if I wanted to not have an outage every 4 minutes according to the app. But in terms of their impact on things like RDOF, Starlink is a really good option for the remote locations that it's going to be almost impossible to get fiber into. And that's what the company themselves has said, that's their bread and butter. That's the market they're going after. So Starlink is not going to try to put Charter out of business. They are not saying that they are going to try to compete with an existing wireline internet provider. What they're going for are the fringe frontier areas. Frontier in the sense of like on the frontier, not in terms of frontier DSL.
It's also pretty
They
expensive.
want a bunch of RDOF. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's also fairly expensive, isn't it? It's $100 a month.
Yeah.
$100 a
And
month,
the
and
equipment was expensive, my understanding,
500
yeah.
to purchase the kit itself, and then 100 per month.
which brings back affordability into the conversation, which is good competition.
Yeah, so Starlink won a bunch of RDOF territory out in other states, and it was very strange. Some of it was the kind of stuff that would make sense. It was the really remote areas out west where it would be really hard to get anything else in there. Other places, I know this one firsthand, we were working with a county in Florida doing similar planning for them. And Starlink won a bunch of little census blocks that a bunch of them were the airport. Nobody lives at the airport unless the plane's delayed. A number of the other census blocks showed as having, like, when you looked at the overview, when you switched to like the imagery, there were a bunch of luxury hotels there. So that was sort of, then apparently as a national, there were a lot of places across the country where Starlink did 4 and 1 places to cover essentially like high-end vacation locations. So we're not sure that's gonna get authorized. To address your affordability question, that is a big issue. There are some existing programs that help, but given the going rates in our area, I think they're probably not enough yet. Because there's a federal subsidy that internet providers can essentially just apply based on, if somebody tells them they have low income and submits a fairly simple check, they just automatically discount $30 a month off of their internet bill. But when you're living hand to mouth, you know, if your internet is $70 a month, okay, $30 a month helps, but still $40 a month might be the difference between whether you're gonna have heat
or not that month. So yeah, folks are still like, we need to get those prices down lower. Again, I'm somewhat optimistic. Biden administration has recently come out and said that affordability is one of their big focuses, as well as just getting the broadband out there. So I'm expecting to see additional subsidy programs come out there. And I think they may also, it's very possible that with future funding programs that come out, that they may actually include a stipulation that there needs to be a low income option, so that there would be like a minimal tier that has enough speed and capacity that you can do everything you need to have the economic benefit of having broadband, but it's inexpensive enough that with the subsidies you don't pay anything for it.
Just to chime in there real quick from Charter, I'm Ashley Carlin, Manager of Government Affairs for Charter Communications. I know that Spectrum and other companies as well, I know AT&T has started offering something, and there are other companies out there as well. We recently rolled out our Spectrum 100 program, so it's a 100 meg service. It's $29.99 a month, and anyone who's eligible for the ACP that Shaw is referring to is also eligible for this program. So when you combine the two, it's 100 megabytes of service for no cost to the customer. So I think internet service providers are definitely picking up on the fact that, you know, the ACP is not enough. There has to be a low cost option to combine with that, and you'll see a lot of them are rolling out programs as we speak. So
Yeah, that's good news. There was a chat question that came in. I'll go ahead and read it out for the folks who aren't looking at the online stuff. Is there any thought toward guaranteeing competition through development of an open access broadband network owned by the county? That would develop true competition while overcoming the decades-old capital expenses necessary to be a player in broadband. That's one of the things we always recommend is whenever it's possible, find ways to get multiple options into a place. When I was showing that middle mile, the middle mile I was showing in those maps is open middle mile. So essentially any provider can come in and lease capacity, get strands on that network for the same price that any of their competitors would pay. There's a lot of other middle mile out there that belongs to individual providers, and they don't publish that. They consider that a trade secret, and they only use that for their own program. As far as having the county own things, I would have to, we can advise you if you end up thinking you want to go down the road of having either some sort of countywide project or a municipal project. A lot of the funding programs, like the state funding program right now, I don't think you'd be able to apply for it as a government entity unless you were already or willing to get certified as a telecommunications provider. Essentially separating the infrastructure from the services. This is a very common one. People compare America to Europe. That's a common thing. In Europe, it tends to be the infrastructure is owned either by a government agency or by one provider who's got kind of like a regulated electric utility here, where they own all the fiber, and then they're required, they essentially make their money by leasing connections on the fiber to the internet providers who provide the end user service. And then, so it's very common that you'll have 5 or 6 providers competing at every address for the right to get that consumer to use their service. In the US, it tends to be the individual providers do it all the way from the ground up. So whoever is the biggest provider in an area is usually the one who invested the money to pay for their own fiber network, or in previous decades, the copper network. And if you want to compete with them, then you have to go in and build your own, what they call overbuilding. You build on top of them. You go in and run your own fiber along the same routes, and then try to get customers to switch that way. That's a big change. That would be a sea change in the way our American economy operates in the telecom sector, to be able to get to something where you've got an infrastructure that is truly open. Has a lot of benefits, but that's a challenging battle to fight. We would love to see it, wearing my consumer advocate hat. That's probably the best way in terms of getting the best service and pricing, but it's not the way the American economy operates at the moment.
I have a quick question for Ashley. Ashley, do you expect Spectrum or Charter to complete the RDOF project in 2 years?
yeah, I I mean, absolutely. I mean, I can't speak exactly for the timeline. A lot of, and I think Sean probably went over this, a lot of when we're able to complete those is dependent upon the pole permitting process. So obviously, when we run fiber, we have to attach to existing utility poles. We don't own any of our own poles, and so we're attaching to whether it's an AEP or a local electric co-op. We have to have the permit to attach to that pole. So we have committed to 2 years from receiving all the necessary permits to complete that build.
And that's fiber to the home and not coax?
Yes, it is fiber to the home. Yep.
Another thing you can look at, with, like, there may be funding programs that focus on this in the future, but another option, if you had other funds similar to ARPA that were available, that you wanted to use for a broadband subsidy, consider talking to your electric providers and seeing about doing a grant that essentially helps with make ready. This is happening down in Washington County, which is Buckeye Hills District. It's not Omega, but Washington Electric Co-op actually has gone ahead. Like, there's been a program to help them fund, and they said, we're going to make all of our utility poles ready for broadband, and we're just going to do it. And so that way, when a provider comes in and wants to attach, it's going to be way cheaper for them to do that. It'll be an incentive for them to come in and cover the region. That's another really good use of funds to be able to make this happen. It also, I suppose, could be a downside to providers like Spectrum who are actually installing now. They're like, well, we dragged our feet and waited 3 years, and maybe everybody would have paid for the make ready for us. But that's the risk of being in the competitive market. But make ready is one of the big hurdles. It costs a lot to get those utility poles ready. So if it becomes possible to subsidize that specifically, that can really make an area more attractive for providers to come in and serve it.
Any other questions, comments, either in person or online?
Jeanette, I've just got kind of a general big picture summary question for you concerning Omega. So not just Coshocton County, but your entire Omega district. To kind of sum it up, the value and the importance of this broadband expansion.
Absolutely. I think, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, for our region to reach economic and social parity with the rest of the state and the rest of the nation, broadband is as an essential utility or service as water, sewer, other items such as that. I think by having this study done, we'll be able to identify priority areas to provide service to, and then work with our communities and ISPs on funding opportunities to serve those areas. We just recently, Sean mentioned the ARC Power Program. We recently worked with Carroll County and an ISP on preparing an application for funding through that program to serve their unserved areas, prioritized areas. So I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us, and it's absolutely essential for us to be competitive in today's economy.
Jeanette, are you doing these presentations for all the members?
Yes, we are. And again, if you know folks that weren't able to attend, we'll be providing the links to YouTube, so please feel free to share those links with other folks. We appreciate comments and feedback as we work to finalize our report.
I'll just jump in and I will emphasize what Jeanette said about the economic effect of broadband and its importance for the region. The pandemic is nearly over, seems like, but the changes that happened in our economy from that are not going away. Like, before the pandemic happened, telehealth, remote learning, working from home, those were little niche things, like, oh, that's, you get to work from home, oh, that's like, you're lucky. Now it's like, there are a lot of jobs that are still being posted now that are just remote. They're like, if you don't have the broadband, you can't participate in that economy. You can't get access to your doctor, kids can't get full access to the educational experience. So it really is crucial to our region at a high level. And there are a lot of economic studies out there that show once you bring broadband into an area, everything goes up. Productivity goes up, GDP goes up, your tax base goes up because you have higher incomes in there, you get new businesses locating there. It's a boon both for the people who already live here. It makes it less likely that their kids are gonna move away so that the area remains vibrant. It also can become an incentive for people to move to the region.
And I think Sean's last comment there about an incentive for folks to move to the region is key. I mean, I used to live in Columbus, 20-some years ago. I can't imagine moving back to an urban area. And I think having broadband, which would allow folks that maybe their work is in Columbus or Cleveland or Cincinnati to maintain the quality of life that we have in our region, because I think it's absolutely outstanding. So it's a tremendous opportunity for us.
There's one final question came in on the chat asking if there's been efforts to try to educate the public about the bad accounting that's happened over the years with all of that previous subsidy money. We've done our part, but we found that, like, I guess it's just Washington, because at some point we're like, look at this $100 billion that didn't get spent well, and it was sort of a resounding, that happens. So like, I think there should be watchdogs who point this out and who try to hold people accountable. What we've ended up focusing on is the new programs advocating for accountability and transparency so that this doesn't happen again. Again, I'll come back to the state's program, Broadband Ohio. They are doing it right. They are holding providers accountable. They're going all the way down to the address level. Like, you can't, with federal programs in the past, you could serve a single household in a census block and then color that census block green and say, hey, it's served. Even though there are 20 households there, only one of them has broadband. The state subsidy, you have to submit a list of every address you're planning on getting subsidy to serve, and then they're going to follow up later and say, okay, did you serve it? So that's the way to do it.
Anything else?
Appreciate the presentation.
Appreciate everyone's time. Again, if you as you review the profiles, if any questions come up, please feel free to ask. But really appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Good virtually seeing everyone. Wish I could have seen you in person.